The wind howled through the pines like a warning that night, bending the tall trees until they groaned against the weight of the storm. The forest had always been silent in its own way, but that evening it sounded alive, restless, almost angry. And in the middle of it stood a small wooden cabin with smoke trembling from its chimney, holding a man who believed he had already lost everything worth loving. By sunrise, that same cabin would no longer belong to his loneliness. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that change lives forever, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Kindness Wave. Stories like this remind us that even in the darkest woods, light can still be found. Elias Rowan had lived alone in the northern woods for nearly 8 years. He was known in the nearby town of Briar Hollow as the silent woodsman who came down once a month with bundles of firewood and carved furniture to trade for flour, salt, and lamp oil. He rarely spoke more than necessary. The townsfolk respected him, but they also kept their distance. Grief had shaped him into something solid and guarded, like the oak trees he chopped down each winter. Years ago, a fever had taken his wife, Mara, and their unborn child within the same cruel week. After that, the cabin they had built together became too full of memories and too empty of laughter. Elias retreated deeper into the forest, building a new cabin by the river, convincing himself that solitude was easier than hope. He woke before dawn each day, splitting logs in the pale blue light, his breath fogging in the cold air. The rhythm of his axe striking wood was the only heartbeat he trusted. The woods did not ask him to smile. The river did not question his silence. In the quiet, he could pretend the ache in his chest was simply another sound of nature. That stormy evening, Elias had just finished stacking wood against the cabin wall when he heard it, an unfamiliar noise that did not belong to wind or branches. It was faint at first, carried between gusts, but unmistakable once he focused. It was the sound of a child crying. He froze. No one ventured into the deep woods after dark, especially not in a storm. The forest paths were treacherous, and wolves had been seen near the ridges. The crying came again, thinner now, as though the wind might swallow it. Elias felt something stir inside him, something he had buried under years of routine. Without thinking too long, he grabbed his lantern and stepped into the rain. The beam of light flickered wildly as he followed the sound through the trees. Mud clung to his boots. Branches scratched at his coat. After several tense minutes, he saw them, huddled beneath a leaning pine near the riverbank. A woman and 3 small children, soaked to the bone. The woman's face was pale but determined, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. She clutched the youngest child against her chest while the other 2 stood close, trying to appear braver than they were. For a moment, they stared at each other in the storm, strangers bound by circumstance. Elias saw fear in their eyes, but also exhaustion so deep it frightened him. The oldest child, a boy of perhaps 10, stood protectively in front of his mother, though his legs trembled. The middle child, a girl with wide hazel eyes, clutched a torn blanket. The youngest, no more than 4, whimpered softly. The woman introduced herself as Celine Arkwright, a widow from a distant farming village that had suffered a devastating fire. Her husband had died months earlier in a logging accident, leaving her with debts she could not repay. When the fire destroyed what little they had left, she had no choice but to leave with her children, Rowan, Mira, and little Callum, hoping to reach Briar Hollow by morning. The storm had caught them halfway. Elias did not think about consequences. He did not calculate how long their supplies would last or how awkward the arrangement might become. He simply said they could not stay out there. He led them back to his cabin, the lantern casting long shadows behind them. Inside, warmth wrapped around them like an embrace. Celine's hands shook as she helped her children remove their wet clothes. Elias laid out blankets near the hearth and added more wood to the fire. He brewed tea from dried mint leaves, watching from a distance as the children slowly stopped shivering. The cabin, once filled only with the crackle of flames and the sigh of wind through cracks, now carried softer sounds, the rustle of blankets, the quiet sniffles of relief. That first night, Elias slept in a chair by the door, telling himself they would leave at dawn. But morning came with clear skies and a harsh reality. The path to town had flooded. Celine had no money, no shelter waiting for her, and 3 children too weak for another long journey. Elias felt the weight of a decision pressing against him. He told them they could stay a few days until the roads cleared. Days turned into a week. The children moved cautiously at first, careful not to touch anything without permission. Rowan watched Elias with guarded eyes, as though measuring whether this man was safe. Mira asked quiet questions about the carvings on the shelves. Callum followed Elias around the yard, fascinated by the axe and the neat stacks of logs. Elias had not realized how silent his life had been until laughter echoed off the cabin walls. One afternoon, he returned from checking traps to find Mira sitting at the table, sketching shapes in charcoal on scraps of wood. She had copied the pattern of leaves from outside and carved them clumsily into a piece Elias had discarded. He wanted to correct her grip, to show her how to guide the blade gently rather than force it, but he hesitated. It had been so long since he had guided anyone. Over time, small changes crept into his routine. He began cooking larger meals. He patched the roof more carefully. He even cleared a wider path to the river so the children could walk safely. Celine helped with chores, her quiet strength matching his own. She repaired torn clothes and mended nets with practiced hands. Sometimes, when the children slept, they would sit by the fire in companionable silence. Their griefs were different but shared the same hollow shape. Yet challenges pressed against them. Supplies ran thin as winter approached. Elias worried constantly about feeding 5 mouths instead of 1. When he went to town to trade, whispers followed him. Some questioned why he had taken in strangers. Others hinted that a lone man and a widow under one roof would spark gossip. Elias returned to the woods with anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. The greatest challenge came when Callum fell ill with a deep cough that rattled his small body. The sound pierced Elias more sharply than the wind ever had. He spent nights tending the fire, warming cloths, and running to the river for fresh water. Celine's strength wavered as fear took hold. Memories of losing her husband haunted her eyes. Elias rode to Briar Hollow in the snow, pushing his horse harder than he had in years to fetch medicine. He did not care about the stares or the questions. All that mattered was the fragile life fighting for breath in his cabin. When he returned and placed the medicine in Celine's trembling hands, something shifted between them. It was not dramatic or loud. It was a quiet recognition that they were no longer merely strangers sharing shelter. Callum recovered slowly. The cabin seemed to exhale in relief. As winter deepened, Rowan began helping Elias split wood. The boy's hands blistered at first, but he refused to quit. Elias showed him how to plant his feet firmly and let the weight of the axe do the work. Rowan listened intently, eager to prove himself. In those moments, Elias felt something he had thought buried forever, the steady warmth of guiding a son. Myra's carvings improved, her delicate leaf patterns evolving into intricate designs. Elias gifted her a proper carving knife one evening, and her face lit up with such pure joy that it startled him. Callum, now healthy, declared the woods his kingdom and the cabin his castle. Spring arrived with soft rain and the scent of renewal. By then, the cabin had transformed. It was no longer a place of echoes but of life. Celine planted a small vegetable patch near the river. Rowan built a fence with Elias. Mira carved a wooden sign above the door, her letters uneven but proud. It read simply, "Home." Elias stood staring at that sign long after the others had gone inside. The word felt heavy, sacred. He realized that somewhere between the storm and the thaw, his heart had begun to mend. Not because the pain of losing Mara had vanished, but because love had found room to grow beside it. One evening, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, Celine placed her hand over his and thanked him for saving them. Elias shook his head. He understood then that he had not saved them alone. They had rescued him from a life measured only by silence and survival. Years passed quietly, marked by seasons and milestones. Rowan grew tall and strong, Myra's carvings became sought after in town, and Callum's laughter remained as bright as the river in summer. The townsfolk stopped whispering. Instead, they spoke of the woodsman who had built a family from kindness. Elias often thought back to that stormy night. He had stepped into the darkness simply to quiet a cry. He had not known he was walking toward a future filled with birthdays, shared meals, and a love that would redefine him. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminds you that even the smallest act of kindness can change destinies, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Your support helps spread stories that keep hope alive. And before we close, I have a special request for you. Comment the word, home, if you believe family is not always found by blood, but by love. On a warm summer evening many years later, Elias sat on the cabin steps, watching his grown children laugh by the river while Celine rested beside him. The forest was still vast and wild, but it no longer felt lonely. The wind that once howled like a warning now whispered through the trees like a blessing. He had taken them in to protect them from a storm. He never imagined they would become the shelter that saved him. And in the quiet glow of sunset, surrounded by the family he never expected but would cherish forever, Elias finally understood that sometimes the greatest miracles begin with a single, compassionate